This presentation is called Modernisms Between the World Wars. And the reason that I call it modernisms is because there's more than one movement at play here. Between World War I and World War II, there was an explosion of different styles, and all very different from each other. What they have in common, though, is that they are new, and hence the name modernism, that they are explorations of new perspectives. Now, one of the reasons for this explosion of new styles is because of the devastation of World War I. World War I was not only devastating in terms of the loss of millions of lives, the most bloody war up to that point ever, but also the emotional and psychological devastation that it wreaked. For many people, the era leading up to World War I, La Belle Époque, the end of the century, was the pinnacle of human existence, that we'd made so much progress. People had visions of utopian societies and everything, all the pain and suffering of the past being left behind. But instead, all that innovation led to bloodier and more destructive warfare than had ever been seen before. And so there was real disillusionment with the world that had led to this war. And this quote from Tonio Novosel, I think, captures the feeling that came out of World War I. He says, "It was the war to end all wars, a senseless slaughter that set the stage for the bloodiest century in human history. Yet it was more than just a war between nations. It was a war between what was and what was to be. The old world was dying, and the new world had yet to be born. People of all classes and nations saw it as some great cleansing fire that would accelerate this battle and lead to a better world. But when it was over, more than men had died in the mud of the battlefields. The naive dreams of progress, along with the innocence of the pre-war world, faith in God, and hope in the future, all died in the trenches of Europe." Oh, wow, I mean, I think it's hard for us to remember now what a big deal World War I is and what an effect it had. But I think William Butler Yeats sums it up quite well in his poem, The Second Coming, which you have excerpted in your textbook, where he says, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." So Yeats is not just talking about World War I, he's talking about the whole world in the early 20th century, that there's just a feeling of loss, that the focus, the old centers, the things that held society together before can't hold it together anymore. And so one society is dead, but the other one has not yet been born, and so that they're caught in the middle somehow. And so what this led to was a wide vacuum for artists, writers, and musicians to fill. What kinds of art do you make in the face of devastation like this? And the answer that many of them came to was you look for new art forms, new ways of talking about life. So one example of this is the war poets. Up to this point, we have not had a lot of poets who are actually experiencing the wars and writing about their experiences, but we do in World War I. And one of my favorites is Wilfred Owen, who was born in England in 1893. And he was working as a teacher during the first year of World War I, but after he visited a hospital for wounded soldiers, he decided to enlist. And this is what he said about his service. He said, "I came out in order to help these boys, directly by leading them as well as an officer can, indirectly by watching their sufferings that I may speak of them as well as a pleader can. I have done the first." And I think many people would argue that he's done the second as well, that his poetry gives a voice to the soldiers of World War I in a way that hadn't happened before. Owen was injured in March 1917 and sent home, and then he returned to the war front on August 1918, but on November 4th, just 7 days before the armistice that ended the war, he was killed by a German machine gun attack at the age of 25. And the bells were ringing on November 11, 1918 in Shrewsbury to celebrate the armistice when the doorbell rang at his parents' home, bringing them the telegram telling them their son was dead. And so they lost their son to the war, but what they have is poetry that captures his experience and that speaks for the generation that lived through the war. One of his most powerful poems is called Dulce et decorum est, and it's based on a Latin phrase, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, that ends the poem, which means it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. Now, Owen doesn't outright say that this is completely wrong, although he does call it a lie. But what he does is he calls it into question. Sweet and fitting it is to die for your country. Well, he lets us see what that really is like. So I'm going to read you the poem and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and toward our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. As if in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Isn't that powerful? I'm just amazed every time I read that at how vivid of an image he creates of what it's like to be a soldier. Now, I don't feel like Owen is saying that war should never happen. He's not an anti-war protester. But what I think he is doing is he's saying, wait a second, it is not so beautiful, it's not so easy, it's not so glorious as people have said before. And speaking as a soldier in the war, he has an authority that's different from those who write about it from outside views. He gives us that new perspective. Another new perspective that comes out in the modernist period is the painting of Pablo Picasso. Now, Picasso painted in something like 88 different styles during his career as an artist, and so it's difficult to pin him down. But one thing that's significant about him is that he was very much into experimentation, very much into innovation. And so he was trained in a traditional painting style. He knew how to paint in the old conventional ways, but rather quickly he decided that that was not going to do for a modern world. And so he looked for new ways of seeing, and the one that he's most famous for is called Cubism. And Cubism is a way of looking at three-dimensional objects in 2 dimensions, instead of trying to create depth in a canvas like the Renaissance painters would do through the use of visual perspective. Picasso wanted us to recognize the flatness of the canvas, to recognize that we were looking only at 2 dimensions. And so what he does is he turns things into their geometric form. Along with his friend Georges Braque, he created this form, Cubism, and made it very popular. At the same time, he experimented with other forms such as collage, which is an actual 3-dimensional form because it creates layers on the canvas. And he also was interested in political events, such as his painting Guernica, which really challenges the actions of war and the power hunger of so many of the European nations during the 20th century. Picasso's most famous painting is probably Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, this 1907 painting that Newsweek recently called the most important painting of the 20th century. Now that may be hard to see as you look at the painting. What's so important about this? Why would this be more important than so many of the other paintings that are out there? One of the main reasons is because of its influence, because of the way that it opens up the world of abstract art. Now, we talked about Cézanne back with the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, and Cézanne began the process of turning reality into geometry, of abstracting, but his paintings were still representational. They were still paintings of things. And as is Picasso's here, but you can see the movement from representation, from realism to abstract painting. And abstract painting means paintings that are not of things, they're shapes, of colors. And so what Cubism does is it fragments 3-dimensional objects into geometric structures. This painting, which is of prostitutes at a brothel in Avignon, began as a moral work that Picasso was decrying the immorality of prostitution and those who frequent these brothels. But you can see that it turned into an artistic exploration pretty quickly. There are a lot of different influences in this painting. First of all, as I mentioned, Cézanne. Second, Titian is another influence with his Venus of Urbino, which we saw mirrored in Manet's Olympia. And here again we have these prostitutes who are looking at us very objectively, very assessingly. So it puts us in the position of clients, of viewers, of voyeurs, peeping toms, looking at them on display. Another influence here is the influence of African art. Hopefully you can see, especially on the right-hand side, these African masks that Picasso has placed on these women. And part of that, I think, is to emphasize the strangeness of it, the primitive nature of the sexual trade. But also, Picasso was very, very interested in the different styles of art that came out of Africa and Asia, and the different possibilities that they offer. And you can see throughout the painting he moves, especially again toward the right and on the left-hand side as well, away from the center, that Picasso is turning these bodies into geometric shapes. He's very interested in the play of form. And this painting is flat. Like so many of the Impressionist paintings, there's not the idea of depth to it. Another new perspective comes through the Harlem Renaissance, in which African-American writers, artists, musicians claimed a place for themselves in mainstream American culture. They argued for the importance of their perspective, their viewpoint. And the author I want to talk about here specifically is Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes wrote, he said, to explain and illuminate the Negro condition in America. As his friend said of him, no one enjoyed being a Negro as much as Langston Hughes. So Hughes did not try to downplay his status as an African American. He did not try to make himself white in order to succeed. Although he had a traditional education, he was very familiar with the traditions and the great works of Western literature. He wanted to expand the possibilities of the American canon and include in it blacks and the black experience. And so the poem that I want us to focus on in your textbook is called I Too Sing America. And this is a direct response to Walt Whitman's poem where he claims to be the poet that sings for all America. But noticeably absent from his writing is the black American. And so Langston Hughes adds himself. Here's the poem. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Now as I read this, I hear a lot in common with what Wilfred Owen is doing. He's saying, no, I know how it is. This is my experience, and my experience is valid. And Langston Hughes seems to be doing the same thing. This doesn't feel like such an angry poem as it is a poem about asserting his importance of saying things are going to change, things are going to have to change. And so the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s draws heavily on the Harlem Renaissance and its influence. And the influence of the Harlem Renaissance is in all the arts. And one of the most powerful and pervasive influences is jazz, the development of jazz. Jazz is America's classical music. It brings together the various strains of American culture, and it's a style of American music that originated in the South, started by African Americans, but it pulls on a wide variety of influences, of rhythms from old Africa, of slave spirituals, of Western tonalities, of the new kinds of rhythms that are developing. It's characterized by a strong, prominent meter. It's very rhythmically driven. It's also characterized by improvisation, where the musicians have to make up their parts as they go, and dotted or syncopated rhythms where the emphasis is not on the beat but on the upbeat, which gives it that jazz feeling. And it has been called the first original art form to develop in the United States of America. It's not derivative of art form, any other art form. It's new. It's American. So the piece we're going to look at, which is on your CD and on the Blackboard site, is a piece by, well, it's performed by Duke Ellington's big band, but it's written by Strayhorn. And what happened was Strayhorn was trying to meet Duke Ellington, trying to get a job as a writer. And so what he did is he took the instructions that Duke Ellington gave him about how to get to their meeting, take the A train, and he turned that into his piece. And so this piece formed the core of Ellington's new recordings after a contract dispute with radio broadcasters lost him his old job. And so it was the basis of his new success. And it has a very straightforward form, an AABA form, where you have an initial melody or initial theme, which is repeated, and then a counter theme, and then back to that initial theme. And it's based on a steady chord progression, so that the musicians could improvise above that. Each of them could take turns with their different solo parts. And so often these were new at every performance, that these virtuoso performers could make it new every time. You can hear in jazz the new instrumentation, heavy use of brass, trumpets and trombones, saxophones, bass, piano, drums, and the piece is driven again by rhythm and those chord progressions. So I'm going to let you listen to a little bit of it so you can hear the style, but again, you have it on your CD and on the Blackboard site. All right. Another new perspective is the development of surrealism. Surrealism is a style in which fantastical visual imagery from the subconscious mind is used with no intention of making the work logically comprehensible. And so a lot of times when people look at surrealist art, they laugh at it because it doesn't make sense. And that's the point of it. The movement was founded by André Breton in 1924, and this is what he said. Surrealism is based on the belief in the superior reality of certain forms of association hitherto neglected, in the omnipotence of the dream and the disinterested play of thought. So why might surrealism appeal to artists in a modern world? Well, first is the growing influence of Freudian psychology. Sigmund Freud had argued that the vast majority of what happens in the mind is not accessible to our conscious thought, that what we consciously can deal with is only the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a vast realm of ourselves, of our minds, that influences our actions, influences our roles, but that we can't reach it through our conscious mind. The example that he gives is of an iceberg, and just with the tip of the iceberg sticking out being the conscious mind, and then everything that's under the water is our subconscious mind. And he talked about the id, which is our primal desires, fighting against the superego, which is what's imposed on us by society. And all these things influence our actions in ways that we don't always understand. And so surrealists are interested in trying to bring that hidden world, that hidden mind, to the canvas. And so they're not logically comprehensible. Although people try to make sense of them, they defy our desires to logically reason through them. Two examples of some of the most famous surrealist paintings. On the left, of course, Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory, and on the right, René Magritte's Man with a Newspaper. Now, on the left, I think you can get a real sense of what surrealism is about. It goes beyond the real. It is surreal. People have tried to make sense of this painting, looking at the clocks as evidence of the importance of time in our lives, the insects on the clocks as the decay of time, the passage of time over which we have no control, the sleeping figure in the center as a reminder of dreams and the influence of the unconscious mind on our dreams. But beyond that, there's no clear meaning to this. It's wide open to interpretation, just as our dreams are. Just as our dreams are a mixture of so many different influences. On the right, you can see that Magritte is very interested in the idea of film and the passage of time that film depicts. You can see that although the painting is called Man with a Newspaper, he only appears in one of the frames. He's out of the other ones. It's very realistic, highly polished painting, and yet again, what is the meaning of it? What are we supposed to make? Are we supposed to make sense of it, or do we just experience it? In any case, it is something new, something different, something that challenges the viewers in very new ways. So the arts between the world wars reject tradition in favor of experimentation. Their mantra is make it new. The focus is on novelty, novelty above all. And they show a distrust of rationality, of reason to cope with human evil, since it didn't work leading into World War I. They make use of new forms of communication, such as film and photography. They show increasing diversity as different voices, different perspectives, different experiences are given voice. And they show a fear and pessimism about the future. And I think you can see this particularly in T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men, in which it's hard to have hope for a post-World War I world.